Welcome back to the deep dive. This time, we're tackling individualized education programs, or IEPs, as most people know them. We've got court cases, we've got opinions from experts, and even some personal stories that we're going to be digging into. We're going to figure out how IEPs have changed the face of education and what they really mean for students, for teachers, and of course, for families.
Sounds like quite the deep dive.
It is. And to help us figure out this complicated world, we've got expert speaker who's going to decode all the legal stuff and show us what it all looks like in real classrooms.
I'm ready to dive in.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, I think it's important to understand like the why behind IEPs. Like, why do we even have these things,
Yeah.
What's the historical context?
Yeah, you're right. Context is key. I think one of the most fascinating things about IEPs is they came about because historically, students with disabilities were excluded from public education. Like, imagine being told that your child can't even attend school because they learn differently.
It's hard to even imagine that now, isn't it?
It's a huge shift in thinking, for sure. And it took some pretty big legislation to make it happen. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which was later renamed IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that was a total game changer.
So IDEA was basically saying every child, regardless of disability, has the right to a free and appropriate public education, which is often shortened to FAPE.
Exactly. But fake doesn't mean everyone gets the same education, right? And that's where the IEP comes in. It's this really detailed roadmap, a legally binding document that spells out the individual supports that a student needs to really benefit from their education.
It's about leveling the playing field. We've got this book here, the IEP checklist, and it says that IEPs represent a paradigm shift in education. What do you think the author means by that?
It's a move away from looking at what a student can't do. Instead, we focus on their strengths and their individual needs. It's not, here's what you can't do. It's more like, how can we help you learn and grow in a way that works for you?
And that's where the individualized part of IEP really comes in, right? It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely. Every single IEP is created through collaboration. You've got the parents, the teachers, specialists, and even the student themselves. It's a team effort to find the best way forward.
It's like everyone's sitting down together and saying, okay, what does this student need to thrive? What are their unique strengths and how can we build on those? What kind of support will make the biggest difference?
That's it. And part of that conversation, a huge part, actually, is this concept of least restrictive environment, or LRE. It's kind of a cornerstone of IDEA, and it gets to the heart of inclusive education.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Everybody uses the word inclusion these days, but I'm guessing LRE is a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah, it's definitely not just inclusion is good. LRE is about making sure students with disabilities are educated with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. But, and this is important, sometimes a student needs more support or a different kind of setting to truly thrive.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where we're supporting inclusion, but also making sure each student's unique needs are truly being met.
Exactly. IDEA says that students with disabilities should be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. And it's those three words, maximum extent appropriate, that can really spark some debate.
Oh, I bet. So how does the IEP team actually decide what's appropriate for each student? Like, how do they navigate that?
That's where those collaborative IEP meetings are so important. The team has to really consider the student's needs, the supports that are available in different settings, and what the potential benefits and challenges of each option might be.
It sounds like there's no easy answer. It's all about carefully weighing those different options and making the best decision for each student individually.
You got it. And it's not just a one-time thing. The IEP isn't static. It's a living document that the team reviews and revises regularly, to make sure it's still meeting the student's needs.
Okay, so we've talked about IDEA and this idea of LRE, but I'm curious, how did these concepts actually come about? I imagine there were some pretty important legal cases that shaped our understanding of what inclusion really means.
Oh, absolutely. There were some landmark cases that really clarified these ideas. One of the most important ones is Board of Education v. Rowley. That was back in 1982, and it really helped define what free and appropriate public education actually means.
Okay, so this is the case that goes beyond just saying every child has the right to an education. It actually gets into the specifics of what kind of education is considered appropriate.
Exactly. What the Supreme Court ruled was that F8 doesn't necessarily mean maximizing a student's potential. What it does is provide a basic floor of opportunity to learn. It makes sure students have access to an education that's comparable to their peers without disabilities.
So it's about setting a baseline, ensuring that every student has the chance to learn and grow, but also recognizing that different students are going to reach different levels of achievement.
Precisely. And another really important case is Timothy W. v. Rochester School District from 1989. This one clarified another key principle of IDEA.
This is the one that established the zero reject principle, right? I'm really interested to hear more about this one.
Basically, the court said that no child could be denied an education, no matter how severe their disability. This case solidified the idea that every student, regardless of their challenges, deserves a chance to learn and grow.
Wow, that's really powerful. It really emphasizes that commitment to providing an education for every student, no matter their abilities.
For sure. And these two cases, Rowley and Timothy W., they really laid the groundwork for a more inclusive and equitable approach to education. They helped shift the focus from can we educate this child to how can we best educate this child.
And that's a huge shift in thinking. It moves us away from excluding students and toward this individualized, supportive approach.
Exactly. So now that we have a better understanding of the history and the legal foundation of IEPs, let's take a look at the process of actually building a meaningful IEP. And remember, collaboration is cool here.
Absolutely. We talked earlier about the IEP team. Who are the core members who sit around that table, and what are their roles?
Well, you've got the parents or guardians, the general education teachers, special education teachers, and whenever possible, the student themselves.
Okay, let's break that down. We know parents or guardians are the experts on their child. They know their strengths, their challenges, their hopes and dreams. But what about the teachers? What unique perspectives do they bring?
General education teachers have a ton of knowledge about the curriculum, what the learning environment is like, and what kind of supports might be helpful. The IEP checklist makes it really clear that their role isn't just to observe. They're active participants in the process.
That makes sense. They're the ones who'll be working with the student every day in the general education classroom. They have that firsthand insight into what will work.
Exactly. They can say what's actually feasible, how to adapt instruction and how to create a supportive and welcoming learning environment. And then, of course, you have the special education teachers who bring their expertise in working with students with disabilities.
So you've got this awesome team of teachers. The general education teacher knows the curriculum and the classroom, and the special education teacher has that specialized expertise in supporting individual needs. Sounds like a pretty powerful combo.
It really is, and it's so important to remember that the student themselves should be part of this whenever possible, especially as they get older. We want to help them be self-advocates, and have a voice in their own education.
Right. IEPs shouldn't be something that happens to a student. It's something that happens with them.
Exactly. And depending on the student's needs, the team might also include other specialists, like a school psychologist, a speech-language pathologist, an occupational therapist, anyone who can help understand the student's needs and develop a really comprehensive plan.
It really does take a village, doesn't it? It seems like creating a plan that's truly individualized requires a lot of different perspectives and expertise. But with so many people coming together, how do you make sure everyone feels heard and respected? How do you ensure good communication in these meetings?
That is a really important point. Open and honest communication is so essential for this team to work well together. Everyone needs to feel respected, like their contributions are valued and they have a real stake in the process.
So it's about finding that balance where the student's needs, the family's perspective, and the teacher's expertise can all come together.
Exactly. Once the team is assembled and ready to work together, the first step is really to build a strong foundation. And that foundation is the students' present levels of academic achievement and functional performance.
PLAAFP. I have to admit that acronym always makes me think of like a funny sound effect, but I know it's a pretty important part of the whole IEP process.
It is. It's like the cornerstone of the entire IEP because it gives this really detailed picture of where the student is right now, both academically and functionally. And it goes way beyond just looking at their grades. It takes into account their strengths, areas of need, any relevant medical or diagnostic information, and how their disability affects their progress in the general curriculum.
So it's like taking a big snapshot of the student, not just how they're doing in school, but how they function in life. And I remember the IEP checklist says that this section should include all sorts of objective data, from standardized tests to observations to work samples. What's the purpose of including all of that?
Well, it gives us a baseline to measure progress from. It helps us understand how they learn. What are their unique challenges? What supports might help them? It's kind of like putting together a puzzle. And each piece of data gives us a clearer picture.
And parents have a really important role here too, don't they?
Of course, parents offer invaluable insights about their child's behavior, their learning styles, things they're interested in, their overall well-being. They can share what works at home, what strategies are helpful, and what they hope for their child's future.
So it's about getting a really complete view of the student as a whole person, not just a test score.
Exactly. And the POAAFP really sets the stage for the rest of the IEP. It helps the team identify goals, services, and supports. Without this clear picture, the rest of the IEP might not be as effective.
It's like building a house, you need a strong foundation to build on, right? So what comes next once we've established the PLAAFP?
Then we get to the fun part, setting goals.
Goals. We all know how important those are in our own lives, right? But when we're talking about IEPs, what makes a goal truly meaningful for a student with a disability?
Well, IDP goals are a little different from the kind we might set for ourselves. These need to be very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Wait, are those SMART goals? I think I've heard of that.
You got it. SMART is a really handy acronym that reminds us what makes a good IEP goal. Let me break it down. First, the goal needs to be specific. It should clearly state what the student will do, under what conditions, and to what level of proficiency.
So instead of just saying something vague like improve reading skills, a SMART goal might be, given a fourth grade level reading passage, Johnny will read aloud at a rate of 100 words per minute with 95% accuracy. Is that kind of what you mean?
Exactly. That's a goal that's specific and measurable. You could easily track Johnny's progress and see if he's meeting the criteria.
Makes sense. So S is for specific and M is for measurable. What about the other parts of a SMART goal?
A stands for achievable. It should be challenging, but also realistic, something the student can actually accomplish with the right supports. We don't want to set them up for failure, right? We want them to feel good about making progress.
Okay, achievable. Then R is for relevant, right? The goal should actually connect to the student's needs, their strengths, and what they want to achieve in the long run.
Right. It should be something that's actually meaningful for the student, something that helps them move toward their future goals. And lastly, T is for time-bound. The goal should have a deadline, usually within the school year. This helps everyone stay focused and on track.
So a SMART goal gives us a clear target, a way to measure progress, and a way to know if we're successful. But I'm guessing we don't just pull these goals out of thin air, right? They should be based on what we learned from the PLAAFP.
You're exactly right. The goals come straight from the students' present levels. They address their areas of need, their strengths, and the unique way of learning. It's all connected to create a plan that makes sense.
It sounds like we're building this IEP step by step, with each part informing the next. We have PLAAFP, we have these SMART goals, but how do we know those goals are actually leading to progress?
That's where progress monitoring comes in. It's super important to make sure the IEP is actually working.
So we can't just set these goals and hope for the best. We need to watch how the student is doing and make changes if things aren't going well.
Exactly. Progress monitoring means regularly checking in, gathering data, and being flexible. It's a cycle of assessing, planning, putting things into action, evaluating, and then adjusting. It's almost like the scientific method, but for education.
That's a great way to put it. So what would progress monitoring look like in a real classroom? Can you give me some examples?
Sure, there are lots of ways to monitor progress, and the way we do it depends on what we're measuring. For academic goals, one common approach is called curriculum-based measurement, or CBM for short.
Oh, yeah, CBM. This is like what we saw with Maria and her reading fluency probes, right?
That's right. CBM uses short, standardized assessments that are lined up with the curriculum. So if we're working on something like multiplication facts, we might give the student a timed quiz every week to see how they're doing. Then we can put those scores on a graph to see if they're improving.
And if the scores aren't going up, or if they're even going down, that's a sign that something's not working and we need to try something different.
Exactly. It's all about using the data to guide our decisions.
This is what I love about the whole IEP process. It's so intentional. We're not just throwing random things out there and hoping something works. We're setting clear goals, choosing specific interventions, and then systematically tracking progress to make sure those interventions are actually making a difference.
I couldn't agree more. It's about being strategic and using data to guide our hands. Now, what about progress monitoring for goals that aren't as easy to measure? Things like behavior or social skills. How do you track those? There are ways to do that too. For behavior, we might use observation checklists or rating scales. For example, let's say a student's goal is to get better at listening. Their teacher might use a checklist to track specific behaviors like making eye contact, following directions, participating in class discussions, things like that.
So you break down those bigger skills into smaller, more concrete behaviors that you can actually observe and track.
Right. The teacher would watch the student regularly, maybe every day or every week, and record what they see on the checklist. That gives us some real data to work with.
And if the data's not showing progress, then you go back and revise the plan, right? Maybe try something new or provide more support.
That's right. Progress monitoring is an ongoing cycle. We assess, we plan, we implement, we evaluate, and we adjust. It's all about responding to the student's needs and making sure we're doing what's best for them.
So important. It's not just about setting the IEP in motion and forgetting about it. We have to stay actively involved.
You got it. And remember, progress monitoring isn't just for the teacher. It's important to share the data with the student, with their family, and with everyone on the IEP team.
Transparency is key. It keeps everyone on the same page and working together toward the same goal.
Absolutely. We're all in this together, working to support this student's success.
Now, sometimes a student might need more than just progress monitoring and goals. What happens when they need a big change to the curriculum itself? Or maybe they need a change to the learning environment.
That's where the difference between accommodations and modifications becomes really important. And this is where it can get a little tricky.
Yeah, let's unpack that a bit. Can you remind us what accommodations are and how they differ from modifications?
Accommodations are basically changes to how a student learns or how they show what they know. But the important thing is that they don't change the content of what's being taught. Think of it like a leveling the playing field. It's giving the student access to the same material as their peers, but in a way that works for their needs.
So, accommodations are about removing barriers, offering support, and making sure the student has the same opportunity to learn as everyone else. What are some examples of accommodations that teachers might use?
Some common ones are extended time on tests, preferential seating, using assistive technology like text-to-speech software, or having directions read aloud. It's about making the information accessible and helping students show what they know in a way that plays to their strengths.
So, with accommodations, we're changing how the student learns, but not what they learn. But sometimes, even with accommodations, a student might need a more significant change to what they actually learning. Is that where modifications come in?
You got it. Modifications are changes to the curriculum itself. We might simplify the content, reduce the amount of work, or focus on different learning objectives.
So, can you give me an example of what a modification might look like?
Sure. Let's say you have a student who's really struggling with advanced algebra. A modification might involve having them work on pre-algebra skills instead, focusing on those basic concepts that will set them up for success later. Or maybe we give them simplified reading material if they have a hard time with decoding and comprehension.
It's all about making sure the student is being challenged, but also supported, and making sure they're learning and growing at a pace that's right for them.
Exactly. And the decision of whether to use accommodations, modifications, or a combination of both, that's something the IEP team decides together. They carefully consider the student's needs and what we're hoping to achieve.
This is where that teamwork is so important. The team can talk about the options, weigh the pros and cons, and make a decision based on what's best for the student.
Absolutely. And it's really important to remember that needing accommodations or modifications doesn't mean a student is less intelligent or capable. It just means they need a different path to get to where they need to be.
That's so important to remember. It's about celebrating those individual differences and recognizing that there's no one right way to learn.
Exactly. Now, we often think of IEPs as something for K-12, but what happens after graduation? How do IEPs handle that transition to adulthood?
That's a great question. It's easy to focus on just getting through the school year, but we need to remember that the whole point of education is to prepare students for life beyond the classroom. And the IEP checklist says that transition planning needs to start by age 16, but it can start even earlier if the team thinks it's a good idea.
You're right. Transition planning is all about making sure students with disabilities have the skills and resources they need for whatever comes after high school, whether that's college, a job, living on their own, or a mix of all of those things.
So it's building that bridge between the structure of school and the real world. How does the team approach this whole transition planning process?
Well, just like with the rest of the IEP, it's all about the individual student. Their transition plan outlines the specific supports, services, and experiences that will help them achieve their post-secondary goals. This could include career exploration, vocational training, independent living skills, or even help with college applications.
There's actually a really interesting case study in one of our sources about a student named Juan Carlos who was getting ready to go to college. He was an amazing baseball player and wanted to play professionally, but he also needed help in areas like reading, communication, and managing money.
His story is a great example of why we need to consider not just academic skills, but also those essential life skills that students need to be successful adults. His transition plan needed to cover all of those things.
It sounds like a really holistic approach is so important for this transition planning. It's not just about academics, it's about supporting the whole person, right? Their needs, their aspirations, everything.
Absolutely. And often it involves more than just the school. Families, community agencies, even potential employers can be involved. It really takes a village to make this transition successful.
There's a quote from the book Whose Future Is It that I thought was really powerful. It says, "Self-determination is not doing it all alone, but rather having the skills and supports necessary to make choices and decisions that affect one's life."
Wow, I love that. It's all about giving students the tools they need to take control of their own lives and make choices that work for them. What a great way to think about transition planning.
It really is. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already. From the history and legal framework to this whole collaborative process, it's clear that IEPs are much more than just paperwork.
For sure, they're a roadmap to a more inclusive and equitable education for all students. and they really represent a big shift in how we think about education and the needs of each learner.
Before we move on, I'd love to hear what stands out to you from all this information. What are some things you'll be thinking about? What's making you curious?
Well, I'm really thinking about this shift from focusing on what students can't do to what they can do and how we can support them in reaching their full potential.
I agree. It's about celebrating every student's unique abilities and finding ways to help them shine. And for me, another key takeaway is the importance of teamwork and collaboration. When parents, teachers, specialists, and students all come together, we can make amazing things happen.
I couldn't agree more. It's about creating that team atmosphere where everyone feels valued and everyone has a role to play in supporting the student's success.
And we can't forget that the IEP isn't set in stone. It's a living, breathing document that can and should change as the student learns and grows.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
Okay, so we've laid a really solid foundation here, exploring the history, the legal framework, and the whole process of building an IEP. Now let's dive a bit deeper into some of the specific pieces of an IEP, starting with this really important role of assessment.
Sounds great. Assessment is often kind of overlooked, but it's so crucial. It helps us understand the student's needs, how they're progressing, and how to best support them.
All right, let's jump right in.
When we think about assessment, it's easy to jump right to standardized tests. But assessment in the IEP world is so much more than that.
Yeah, okay, so let's broaden things out a bit. What exactly are we talking about when we say assessment in this context?
We're talking about gathering information from a bunch of different sources to really understand the student, their needs, their strengths, their challenges. It's not just about figuring out if they qualify for special education. It's about painting a complete picture of them as a learner.
So it's figuring out how this particular student learns best, what might be getting in their way, and where they might need a little extra help.
Exactly. And to gather this information, we use a whole toolkit. The IEP checklist mentions standardized tests, informal assessments, observations, work samples. Each of these gives us a different piece of the puzzle.
Okay, let's break those down a bit. I remember standardized tests. They always felt pretty high pressure, but I guess they have their place.
Definitely. They give us a snapshot of how a student is doing compared to other kids their age. It can help us spot areas where they're strong and areas where they might need more support.
But they don't tell us everything, right? A test score can't capture everything about a student's learning style or the challenges they might be facing in the classroom.
Exactly. That's where those other types of assessment come in. Informal assessments, things like teacher-made quizzes or projects, can give us more specific information about how well a student understands a particular concept.
It's like zooming in and getting a more detailed picture.
Yeah, a great way to think about it. And don't underestimate the power of just observing. Teachers spend so much time with their students, they pick up on those subtle things like how a student approaches a task, how they interact with their classmates, whether they're engaged or struggling.
Observations are all about those little details that a test might miss. And what about work samples? Things like writing assignments, artwork, science projects.
Exactly. They provide concrete evidence of what a student can do. We can see how their skills are developing and where they might need more help.
So it's not just one snapshot in time. We're looking at growth and change over time.
Precisely. And the choice of which assessments to use always comes back to the student's individual needs and those goals outlined in the IEP.
It's all about choosing the right tool for the job, right?
Absolutely. And that's where that collaboration within the IEP team is so important.
Yeah, working together to figure out which assessments will give you the most helpful information and how to use that information in a way that actually benefits the student.
Exactly. And speaking of using information to benefit the student, let's talk about progress monitoring. We touched on this earlier, but how does it work in practice?
Yeah, progress monitoring. So it's all about regularly checking in to see if the IEP is actually working, right? If the student is moving toward those goals and whether we need to make any adjustments.
Right, you're checking the plan's temperature. Is it working like it should, or do we need to tweak things a bit?
Perfect analogy. And just like there are different ways to assess, there are different ways to monitor progress depending on what we're trying to measure, I imagine.
Exactly. For those academic goals, a really common approach is called curriculum-based measurement, or CBM.
Ah, CBM. This is like what we saw with Marina and her reading fluency probes, right? Where she read a passage aloud for a minute and the teacher timed her and counted the number of words she read correctly.
Exactly. CBM uses short, standardized assessments that are directly connected to what the student is learning in class. So if they're working on, say, multiplication facts, we might give them a timed quiz every week to see how they're doing. Now we can see if those scores are going up over time.
And if they're not, that's a sign that we need to rethink our approach.
Right. We use the data to make informed decisions.
It's so intentional and systematic. I love that. We're not just hoping for the best. We're setting goals, choosing specific interventions, and then watching carefully to make sure those interventions are making a real difference.
I agree. It's about being strategic and data-driven. Now, what about those goals that aren't as easy to measure, like behavior or social skills? How do we track progress in those areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. It seems trickier.
There are good methods for that, too. For behavior, we might use observation checklists or rating scales. Let's say the goal is for a student to improve their listening skills. The teacher might create a checklist of specific behaviors, like making eye contact, following directions, participating in discussions.
So you break down those big skills into smaller, more concrete behaviors that you can actually observe and track.
Exactly. The teacher observes the student regularly, maybe every day or every week, and records their observations on the checklist. This gives us concrete data to see if the student is making progress.
And if they're not, then we can revisit the plan and try something different.
Exactly. Progress monitoring is an ongoing cycle. We assess, we plan, we put the plan into action, we evaluate, and we adjust. It's all about being responsive to the student's needs and using data to make the best decisions.
It makes so much sense. It's not a one-time thing. We have to stay involved and keep watching how the student is doing.
Absolutely. And remember, this data isn't just for the teacher. It's important to share it with the student, their family, and the whole IEP team.
Right. Transparency is key. Keeps everyone in the loop and working together.
For sure. We're all on the same team here, working to help this student succeed. Now, we talked earlier about accommodations and modifications, those adjustments we make to how a student learns or what they learn. Can you give me some real-world examples of what those might look like in a classroom?
Yeah, let's get practical here. I'm picturing a classroom and we have a student with an IEP who needs some accommodations to really access the material. What might that look like in action?
Well, the IEP checklist does a great job of breaking down accommodations into categories: presentation, response, setting, and scheduling. Let's start with presentation accommodations. This is all about how the information is presented to the student.
So for a student who struggles with visual processing, maybe we provide them with materials in a larger font or use visual aids along with our spoken instructions. Or for a student with an auditory processing issue, we might offer them recordings of the textbook so they can listen to it instead of just reading it.
Perfect examples. Presentation accommodations are all about making the information accessible to students who learn in different ways.
And then you have response accommodations, which are about giving students different ways to show what they know.
Exactly. For a student who has trouble with writing, we might let them give oral answers instead of written ones, or maybe they can use a scribe to write down their answers. Or for some students, it might be helpful to use technology, like creating a presentation instead of writing a traditional essay.
So it's about flexibility, giving them a chance to show what they know in a way that works for them.
Exactly. And then there are setting accommodations, which focus on the learning environment itself.
So this is where we might create a quiet workspace, offer noise-canceling headphones, or let the student take breaks when they want to.
You got it. Those could be especially helpful for students who are easily distracted, have sensory sensitivities, or who get anxious in certain settings.
And finally, we have scheduling accommodations, which involve making adjustments to the pace or timing of activities.
Right, so that might mean giving extra time on tests, breaking down big assignments into smaller chunks, or letting students take more frequent breaks. It's all about recognizing that some students need a little more time or have trouble focusing for long stretches.
It's about tailoring the learning experience to fit each individual's needs.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these accommodations should be used consistently across all learning environments, not just in the classroom, but also during tests and other assessments.
Consistency is so important. It helps to create a predictable and supportive environment. And remember, accommodations aren't about giving someone an unfair advantage. They're about making sure everyone has a fair shot at showing what they know.
Exactly. Now let's talk about modifications, those changes we make to the curriculum itself.
Okay, modifications. So remind me again, when do we consider using modifications?
Usually when a student's disability makes it really hard for them to access the typical grade-level curriculum, even with accommodations. So in those cases, we might simplify the material, reduce the amount of work, or adjust the learning goals altogether.
Can you give me an example of how that might work?
Imagine you're teaching a lesson on fractions. With accommodations, you might provide manipulatives or visual aids or give students extra time to work through the problems. But if that's not enough, you might modify the curriculum. Maybe the student works on a smaller set of problems, or maybe they focus on identifying fractions instead of adding or subtracting them.
So it's about finding that right level of challenge, making sure the student is learning and growing, but also feeling successful.
Exactly. Just like with accommodations, modifications should be tailored to each individual student, and the IEP team works together to make those decisions.
It's a team effort always, and it seems like deciding whether to use accommodations, modifications, or both could be a tricky thing. How does the IEP team navigate that?
It involves carefully thinking about the student's strengths, their needs, the goals in the IEP, and what resources are available. And it's not a one-time decision. The team needs to keep coming back to this, looking at the student's progress, and making adjustments as needed.
So the IEP is dynamic, not static. It evolves along with the student.
Right. It's like a roadmap that can be adjusted and adapted as the student learns and grows.
Okay, we've talked about accommodations and modifications, those ways we personalize the learning experience. What other big considerations are there when we're developing an IEP?
Well, transition planning is incredibly important, especially as students start thinking about life after high school.
Right, preparing them for that big transition to adulthood. And remember, IDEA says we need to start this planning by age 16, though we've talked about starting even earlier if it makes sure.
Absolutely. The sooner we start, the more time we have to explore the students' interests, help them develop those important skills, and connect them with resources in the community.
So what does this transition planning actually look like?
It should cover a whole range of areas, depending on the student's goals. It might include things like post-secondary education, job training, employment, independent living skills, getting involved in the community, and even their social and emotional well-being.
It's a lot to think about, but it really emphasizes that we're not just focused on academics, we're thinking about all aspects of their life.
Exactly. It's about helping them become well-rounded individuals who can thrive in all areas of their lives.
And this planning goes beyond just the school walls, right? We're talking about families, community agencies, potential employers, and of course the student themselves being involved in the process.
Exactly. It's a collaborative effort. Everyone has a role to play in supporting the student's journey towards a successful and fulfilling adulthood.
And remember that student, Juan Carlos, who was getting ready to go to college, the one who was a talented baseball player but also needed support in areas like reading and managing his finances.
Yeah, I remember him.
His transition plan needed to address all of those things, helping him chase his dream of playing baseball while also developing the skills he needed to be successful in college and in life.
That's a perfect example of how transition planning can be so powerful. It creates a path for success that takes into account all of the student's individual strengths, interests, and needs.
I love that. So we've covered so much today: assessments, progress monitoring, accommodations, modifications, transition planning. It's clear that IEPs can be really transformative for students.
They can be. They represent a huge shift in how we think about education. It's not one size fits all. Every student deserves a chance to learn and grow in a way that works for them.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some of the things that are sticking with you? What's resonating with you?
Well, one thing that I'm really thinking about is how important it is to use data to make decisions throughout the IEP process. From the very beginning when we're assessing the student to ongoing progress monitoring, data helps us make smart choices about supports and interventions. It's about being intentional and using evidence to guide our actions.
I love that. Data helps us move away from just guessing and toward a more thoughtful and effective approach. And for me, another big takeaway is the power of collaboration. When parents, teachers, specialists, and students all work together, we can create IEPs that really work.
I agree. It creates that sense of shared responsibility and a belief that we're all working towards the same goal, which is the student's success.
Exactly. And we can't forget that the IEP is a living document. It's not set in stone. It's something that can and should change as the student learns and grows.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
Okay, we've explored a lot of the nuts and bolts of IEPs, but I think there's another really important piece we need to address: the idea of fairness. Where do IEPs fit into the larger conversation about equity and fairness in education?
That's such a good question. Fairness is a big topic, and it often comes up when we're talking about IEPs and the supports they offer.
Right. I'm sure we've all heard those whispers in the classroom. It's not fair that Jimmy gets extra time on the test. Why does she get to use a calculator?
Those are valid questions. And it's important to address them head on. In fact, the IEP checklist is a great example of a teacher who used a funny story to help her students understand that fairness isn't about everyone getting the same thing. It's about everyone getting what they need to succeed.
I love that. It reframes the whole conversation in a way that kids can really understand. It's like saying we wouldn't expect someone with a broken leg to run a race without crutches, would we?
Exactly. Accommodations and modifications are all about leveling the playing field, making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to learn and shine, regardless of their challenges.
It's about making sure that everyone has a chance to thrive.
And fairness isn't just for students with IEPs. It's about creating a classroom culture where everyone feels comfortable asking for help and receiving the support they need.
So a truly inclusive classroom is one where everyone feels supported and valued no matter what. Okay, we've talked about fairness in individual classrooms, but how do IEPs and that concept of LRE, least restrictive environment, connect to the general education curriculum? How does that work?
That's a key connection. Remember, IDEA emphasizes that students with disabilities should be learning alongside their peers in the general education setting, as much as possible. It's not about creating a separate curriculum for them. It's about figuring out ways to support their participation in those sensory learning experiences.
So we're not separating students with IEPs, we're integrating them into the general education setting as much as possible.
Exactly. And the IEP team has to figure out how to make that happen. The IEP checklist talks about aligning the IEP goals with the standards that all students are learning. Those goals should be relevant and connected to what everyone else is doing, not isolated and separate.
So the general education teacher's expertise is really important here.
Oh, absolutely. They're the ones who know the curriculum inside and out, so they can provide really important insights on how to adapt lessons, differentiate activities, and create a learning experience that works for everyone, including the student with an IEP.
It's about finding those creative solutions, meeting the students' individual needs, but also making sure they're engaged and learning alongside their peers.
Exactly. And LRE goes beyond academics, too. It applies to extracurricular activities, social events, everything. Students with disabilities should have opportunities to participate in the school community just like everyone else.
It's all about creating that sense of belonging, building a school culture where everyone feels welcome and included.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about the legal framework of IEPs and following the rules of IDEA, but I think it's just as important to remember the human element here.
Yes, behind every IEP, behind every data point and assessment, is a child with dreams, challenges, and a unique story to tell.
We need to approach IEPs with empathy, with compassion, with a genuine desire to help each student shine. It's not just about checking boxes, it's about seeing the person behind the IEP.
I love that. So true. We need to remember that the IEP is just one tool, and it's not a magic solution. It's a guide that needs constant collaboration, communication, and flexibility to really work.
Exactly. We have to be willing to try new things, make adjustments to the plan, and celebrate those small victories along the way.
It's about creating a learning experience that honors the individual and recognizes that everyone learns and grows at their own pace.
Absolutely. And ultimately, it's about empowering students with disabilities to understand their own needs, advocate for themselves, and have a say in their education.
What a great way to put it. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. Assessments, goals, accommodations, modifications, transition planning, and even this complex idea of fairness in education. It's clear that IEPs are much more than just pieces of paper. They're dynamic tools that can really make a difference in students' lives.
They really can. They represent a commitment to inclusion, equity, and personalized learning. They show a belief that all students deserve a high-quality education that meets their needs and sets them up for success.
What a powerful way to sum it up. Before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What parts of our discussion today really resonated with you? What are you still thinking about?
Well, the emphasis on student voice really stuck with me. It's not just about doing things for students, it's about doing things with them. Their input, their perspectives, their goals, all of that should be at the center of the process.
I completely agree. We want students to be active participants in their own education.
And I'm also thinking about the importance of seeing the whole child. Every student is an individual with their own unique strengths, interests, and dreams.
Right? IEPs should be about celebrating those strengths and helping students cultivate their passions while also giving them the support they need to overcome challenges.
Yes, and remember, the IEP is a living document. It's not something that's set in stone. It's a roadmap that can and should be adjusted as the student learns and grows.
It's a journey, not a destination.
And speaking of journeys, our deep dive today has been quite the adventure. I think we've all gained a deeper understanding of how these plans can create a more inclusive and equitable learning experience for all students.
We've covered so much ground, but I'm sure there are still so many questions to explore. So we want to hear from you. What stood out to you today? What questions do you have about IEPs? Share your thoughts with us on social media, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning. You know, we were just talking about how important it is to really see the whole child, not just the disability, but I imagine that's like a lot easier said than done, right?
Oh, for sure.
So how do we make sure that IEPs are really focused on the student, like their individual needs and goals, and not just about, checking boxes and following the rules?
It's a great question, and it's really easy to get lost in the procedures and the paperwork, but we always have to come back to that human element, remembering that there's a student, a child with their own dreams, their own struggles, who wants to learn and grow.
So how do we move past just the paperwork and make this process truly student-centered?
One really important thing is to get the student involved as much as possible, especially as they get older. Ask them about their goals, what they're interested in, their strengths, the challenges they're facing. Let them be a part of the decision-making when it comes to supports and how they learn best.
It's about empowering them to advocate for themselves, right?
Exactly. And we also need to think outside the box. Be willing to get creative, try new things to meet their needs. Maybe that means using technology in a new way, or bringing their interest into the classroom, or finding those unique ways to support their social and emotional development.
So being flexible and adaptable.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, and we have to remember that the IEP is a living document. It's not set in stone. It can and should change as the student learns and grows.
So we're constantly evaluating, reflecting, making changes as we go based on the students' progress and their feedback.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process, a collaboration between everyone involved, and we all share that commitment to the student's success.
Now, we've talked a lot about the specifics, the assessments, the goals, accommodations, modifications, but what's the big picture here? What's the ultimate goal of an IEP? What are we really trying to achieve?
I think at its core, the goal of an IEP is to help students with disabilities reach their full potential, both in school and in life.
So helping them develop the skills and the knowledge and the confidence they need to succeed, no matter what path they choose.
Absolutely. It's about opening doors, removing barriers, and creating opportunities for them to thrive.
It's recognizing that every student, no matter their challenges, has something amazing to offer the world.
Couldn't agree more. IEPs are about believing that all students deserve a high-quality education that meets their individual needs and helps them build a bright future.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on, I think. So here we are at the end of our deep dive into IEPs. We've explored the history, the legal stuff, the collaborative process, the challenges and the rewards. And most importantly, I hope we've all come away with a deeper understanding of the human element, the heart of all of this.
Me too. Behind every IEP, there's a student with their own hopes and dreams and challenges to overcome.
And our job as educators, parents, advocates is to support them every step of the way.
That's what it's all about.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I always learn so much from these deep dives, and this one has been especially insightful.
I've enjoyed it too. It's always great to have these conversations and learn from each other.
And as always, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you today? What are you still thinking about? What questions do you have? Share your thoughts with us on social media, and let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning.